Hey, you welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into ground venison. I know what you're
Yeah.
thinking.
I was gonna say,
Venison,
yeah.
isn't that just for fancy restaurants
Right?
or hardcore hunters?
Yeah. But
Trust me,
yeah,
there's a lot more to this meat than meets the eye.
there
Yeah,
is. You're absolutely right.
yeah,
Venison is having a real moment right now.
it is.
And it's not just because of its unique flavor.
Well, you sent in some venison recipes,
I did.
so you're obviously intrigued.
I am very
We're
intrigued.
going to explore everything,
Yes.
from its surprising health benefits to cooking tips that will make you a venison pro in no time.
That's the goal.
Exactly. Let's start with something that might surprise you.
Okay.
The nutritional side of things.
Okay.
We all know protein is important,
It is.
but venison takes it to a whole new level.
It really does. 100 grams of ground venison has a whopping 24 grams of protein,
Okay.
but only 2.5 grams of fat. To put that in perspective, that's almost 5 times less fat than the same amount of ground beef.
Wow, that's a pretty significant difference.
Yeah.
I can see why people are calling it a lean, mean protein machine.
It is. It's a fantastic choice for anyone looking to up their protein intake while keeping an eye on their fat consumption.
Right.
But let's be honest, we also want our food to taste good.
Yeah.
And there's a misconception that venison is always gamey or tough.
So is that true, or is it more about how you cook it?
That's a great question, and it's where things get really interesting. Venison actually has a delicate, almost sweet flavor
Okay.
that takes on other flavors beautifully. Think of it like a blank canvas for your culinary creativity.
I like that analogy. And your sources mentioned using spices like cumin, paprika, nutmeg, even fresh herbs.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking gourmet venison burgers here?
Absolutely. Imagine a venison burger seasoned with smoky paprika and garlic topped with melted cheese and caramelized onions.
Okay, stop. You're making me hungry, but I have to admit I've always been a bit intimidated by cooking venison. Any tips for someone who's new to this?
One of the most important things is to avoid overcooking it.
Okay,
Venison is naturally lean,
right.
so it can dry out quickly if you're not careful. Aim for a medium temperature of 140 to 145 degrees Fahrenheit, or 150 to 160 if you prefer it well done.
Got it. No venison jerky allowed unless that's what you're going for. But is there anything else we can do to guarantee a tender and juicy result?
Absolutely. Here's a pro tip. Add a pat of cold butter to the ground venison before you cook it.
Okay,
It'll melt in and keep everything nice and moist.
that's a great trick. I never would have thought of that. So we've covered burgers, but let's talk versatility. Is ground venison really a good substitute for any ground meat?
You can definitely use it in so many ways. Think meatballs, tacos, meatloaf chili, even shepherd's pie.
Wait, venison shepherd's pie. Now that's something I need to try.
Oh, it's good.
It sounds like the key is to get adventurous in the kitchen.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to experiment and see what you can create. And speaking of experimenting,
This is where things get really interesting, right? Tell me more.
yes, experimenting with different sources for your venison can make a huge difference in the final flavor. It's not like buying ground beef at the supermarket where everything's pretty uniform.
That's a good point. I've never even thought about where my venison comes from, so what are our options here?
You have a few choices. You can find ground venison at some specialty butcher shops, and even a few grocery stores are starting to carry it. But one of the most interesting options is getting it directly from a hunter.
So if I happen to have a friend who hunts, I'm in luck.
Absolutely. And there's a real advantage to going that route because you can learn about the deer's diet and habitat. For example, a deer that foraged on wild berries and acorns will have a slightly different flavor profile than one that primarily grazed on grasses.
That's fascinating. It's like getting a backstory to your meal.
Mm.
But what if I don't know any tips for buying venison at a store?
Don't be afraid to ask questions, find out where the deer came from and how it was processed. A good butcher will be happy to share that information.
So it's all about being an informed consumer, which makes sense for any food we buy. But let's say we've got our hands on some beautiful ground venison. Are there any common mistakes people make when cooking it?
Besides overcooking, which we already mentioned, one thing to keep in mind is that venison needs a bit more seasoning than other ground meats. Because the flavor is so delicate, you don't want to be shy with the spices.
So all those herbs and spices we talked about earlier are really important.
Exactly. Things like garlic, paprika, cumin, and even a touch of nutmeg can really elevate the flavor of venison. And don't forget that cold butter trick for extra juiciness.
Right. That's a game changer for sure. So we've talked a lot about the basics, but I'm curious to get a bit more creative. Any suggestions for dishes that go beyond the usual burgers and chili?
The possibilities are truly endless. You could use ground venison in stuffed peppers, tacos, or even as a pizza topping.
Venison pizza, now you're speaking my language. What about using it in different cuisines? Any ideas there?
You mentioned venison empanadas earlier. Those are a delicious example of how venison can be used in South American cuisine. You could also try a venison shepherd's pie for a British twist, or even a venison curry for an Indian-inspired dish.
Okay, my culinary wheels are officially turning. I'm already picturing a venison taco night with all the fixings. But I know some people might feel intimidated by cooking with venison for the first time. What advice would you give them?
I'd say start with something simple, like venison burgers or meatballs. Those are easy to master and will give you a feel for how the meat cooks. Don't be afraid to follow recipes closely at first and then gradually start experimenting with your own flavor combinations.
And of course, there are tons of great resources available online, like those amazing recipes on Fork and Fry.
Absolutely. They have everything from simple weeknight meals to more elaborate dishes, so you're sure to find something that suits your taste and skill level, and most importantly, have fun with it. Cooking should be enjoyable even when you're trying something new.
I love that advice. It's so true. But before we wrap things up, there's one more important aspect of venison. We need to address sustainability in a world where we're all becoming more conscious of our food choices. How does venison stack up?
That's a great question, and one that's becoming, increasingly important for so many people. The good news is that venison is actually a very sustainable choice when it comes to meat consumption.
Really, I have to admit, I never thought of venison as being particularly sustainable. Tell me more.
Well, think about it this way. Deer are a naturally abundant and renewable resource. They're not raised in confined spaces or fed a diet of grains like many other livestock.
So they're basically living off the land, foraging for their own food.
Exactly. They roam freely and graze on wild plants, berries, and nuts. This natural diet not only contributes to the leanness and flavor of the meat, but also means they have a much lower environmental impact.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's a stark contrast to the environmental concerns we hear about with factory farming.
Absolutely. Plus, there's another aspect of sustainability to consider. In many areas, deer populations can actually become overpopulated.
I've heard about that it can lead to problems like habitat destruction and even an increase in car accidents, right?
Exactly. So hunting, when done responsibly and in accordance with regulations, can actually play a crucial role in maintaining a healthy ecosystem.
So choosing venison isn't just about enjoying a delicious and healthy meal. It's also about supporting sustainable practices.
Precisely. It's a way to make a conscious choice that benefits both our bodies and the planet.
Wow. I have to say, I've learned so much today. Ground venison has gone from something I was a bit intimidated by to an ingredient I'm really excited to explore.
I'm thrilled to hear that it's a truly versatile and delicious meat with so much to offer.
Well, I hope we've inspired our listeners to give ground venison a try too.
Me too. It's a culinary adventure worth taking.
So there you have it. Everything you need to know to dive into the world of ground venison, from its surprising health benefits and incredible versatility to its sustainability and unique flavor. There's a reason this lean protein is gaining popularity, and remember, whether you're a seasoned chef or a kitchen newbie, there's a ground venison recipe out there waiting for you.
And don't forget to check out www.forkandfry.com for a treasure trove of delicious and easy-to-follow recipes that will have you cooking up a storm in no time.
That's right, from venison burgers to venison empanadas to venison chili and so much more, they've got you covered. And hey, if you try one of their recipes or create your own venison masterpiece, we'd love to hear about it. Share your culinary adventures with us on social media or leave a comment on the Fork and Fry website. We're always excited to connect with fellow food enthusiasts.
Until next time, happy cooking, everyone.
Keep exploring and stay curious.